Renewable energy represents 30% of the global electricity generation, with a 340 gigawatt increase in just the past year. This is the biggest increase ever registered. We could think that green energy and the renewable transition are well on their way looking at these numbers. However, every action inspires counteraction, and with the spread in renewable asset installations, some groups appear to resist it. This phenomenon is called NIMBY. But what exactly is this movement arguing? Hi, and welcome to Energy Explained in Short, where we discuss all things energy and more specifically renewable energy. In these In Short series, we will tackle a topic and have a discussion, so you get the bigger picture in a small format. In this episode, we talk about the reasoning behind these groups, imagining new landscapes, and how to go from NIMBY to PIMBY. NIMBY, or not in my backyard, is not a phenomenon exclusive to renewables. In fact, the first time the concept was mentioned was in 1989 in a US newspaper, referring to social groups opposing a nuclear waste site. So the term NIMBY can be used for any kind of opposition to projects that are deemed to have negative effects in the local area. But in this episode, we will address the NIMBY phenomenon regarding renewables. So the first question to ask in this matter could be, are there any real concerns here? Well, there are some costs related to having renewable plants close to one's household.
I de helt værste tilfælde, at man sætter en vindmølle ret tæt på en bolig, så kan man sige, at prisfald der ligger i omegnen af 10-15% af boligens værdi.
This is Toke Pandu, senior researcher at Aarhus University and assistant professor in spatial environmental economics at the University of Copenhagen. He explains how, in the worst cases, where the turbine is placed close to a house, that house's price drops between 10 to 15%. So, monetarily speaking, there is a tangible cost of having turbines in the backyard. But why does having a turbine have such an effect on the value of the house? This could happen because of what is called, in academic terms, visual pollution. We all know about sound pollution, right? So, in the same way sound pollution disrupts sonic quality, visual pollution refers to elements that disrupt or diminish the aesthetic quality of both natural and human-made environments. Examples of these could be billboards, utility wires, or, in our case, wind turbines or solar panels. But why are wind turbines seen as visual pollution? Let me illustrate it with these rhetoric questions. Would you place a wind turbine in front of the Eiffel Tower? Solar panels through Central Park in New York? A hydropower station in Niagara Falls? My guess is no, because it steals away from the sense of that place, of its identity. The loss of sense, that feeling of having a place's identity stripped away, is the same for people who oppose having turbines close to their homes. The view they imagine is natural when looking out of the window. Perhaps a romanticized view that pictures a 19th century scenery. That scenery does not include turbines. As Toke Pandu told us, it is all about the way we imagine the landscape to look like. And in the traditional sense, wind turbines and solar parks are not part of that imagination. So that needs to change, which poses an interesting question. How will our landscape look like in a 100% renewable future? Well, for a 100% clean scenario to happen, multiple technologies have to be installed in different places, and wind turbines are a part of an integrated green energy system. So, in the future, we might all have turbines in our backyards, or at least we will be able to see them from our kitchen window. This means that all of us will be facing that visual pollution. So, if everybody has the turbines, then it won't be an exception, and the monetary and emotional effects might be less apparent or even become inexistent. But we are not quite there yet. In 2021 alone, local governments in the US blocked 13 solar and 31 wind projects. These are scenarios where the NIMBY discourse has pushed back renewable development. So, how do we turn NIMBY, not in my backyard, into PIMBY, please in my backyard? We talk about this today in the discussion. So I think this case is a good starting point for us to discuss today, Kirstine, because it really puts into perspective how much power ideas actually have.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to the eye of the beholder. Like for me, for example, I get a big smile on my face when I see new turbines or solar PV plants being set up. I grew up in the countryside on the west coast of Denmark, very close to a new renewable energy hub. So every time I drive home to my parents, I drive by this energy hub, and recently I've seen, there's new turbines coming up, or there's new additions to the solar PV plant, and it really does put a smile on my face because I'm like, this is the renewable future. It reminds me of the green movement, and this is such a big part of our future.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I also always fantasized with the idea of having a solar PV on my rooftop, maybe in the future, not, or a little turbine. Yeah, maybe not now, because I live in Aarhus, it's a city, of course. But yeah, I agree with you in that turbines or solar panels have certain connotations, and those connotations for me personally are also generally positive. Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't live right next to a solar park or a wind turbine, so maybe I would feel different if I did.
Not true. I mean, this is a real dilemma for some, and it does affect the renewable movement.
Yeah, and maybe it's important to recognize these objections towards the renewable power plants. But maybe it's also a way we can see how we can change these objections and their perception of the turbines.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things we can do is perhaps debunk some myths that go around and that have that effect on, or that affect that discourse. And so we can go through some of them. So one argument we often hear is that renewables are very noisy.
And there is probably some truth to that. But of course, not all renewable assets are the same. There is, of course, a difference between wind turbines and solar plants. You can see wind turbines and hear them from a greater distance compared to a solar PV plant. So, of course, they affect houses much more than solar parks do. And that's also something that Togo Penduro, one of our guests, mentioned when we interviewed him in the episode where we discussed NIMBY.
But I think this noise can be put into perspective when you think about how a wind turbine that is 500 meters away produces no greater noise than maybe a fridge or a microwave. So and then additionally, we know that wind farms have to comply with regulations, and they have to respect noise levels that are established by law. So yes, they do make noise, but maybe relatively speaking, not that much, perhaps we could say.
Yeah. So the second myth could be that renewables kill birds and bats.
Yeah, and with this one, we got ourselves to do some math. once again. Yeah, but we saw that collisions with turbines cause what's equivalent to 0.09% of deaths compared to window crashes. So again, if we put it into perspective, these numbers also showed that it's relatively low.
But I think with this one, the argument may be related to more animal welfare in general, and how we can make sure that wildlife is safe when we install the renewables.
True, yeah. And it's, again, yeah, it's a relatively low number, but it's still birds that die. Yeah. So, and we want to avoid that, of course. And that's a very valid reason to worry.
Yeah, and actually when a renewable energy project is being set up, there are these studies that find out the environmental impact these renewable energy projects have. They need to be made, and of course this will establish if the site is compatible, and if there are some needs that and measures that needs to be taken care of. Also, can you do some monitoring so you can control it better if you have an area with wildlife. So acknowledging the risks and setting up these preventative measures is a part of the requirements here.
Okay, so we have one last myth that we will debunk today, and that is that renewables take land from farmers. So, of course, everyone deserves to have space, and when developing new renewable sites, it's important to address what that area is being used for currently, but that doesn't always mean that it must be one or the other.
There is actually this movement towards what we call power farming, where farmers encourage investors to cooperate and then maybe have solar PV plants together with their agriculture land.
Yeah, so it's like a win-win situation for the farmers.
Exactly. Yeah. The farmers, they get a share of their power production revenue, and at some solar power plants, animals like goats and sheep, for example, they can be used to keep down the level of crops so they don't cover for the solar plants.
Yeah, and I guess the solar panels can also be used as shelter for the animals, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's beneficial for both parties, definitely.
Yeah, perfect. So now that we covered the myths, I think we can try and answer our main question today, which is, how do we bring people on board? How do we go from that NIMBY to the PIMBY, the please in my backyard?
Yeah, I mean, if we take the example of the farmers in local societies, it could be these good trade-offs for people to get vested in, and so they kind of become a part of the share of the profit. So instead of they seeing noise or potential threat for birds and bats, they see money spinning or money being generated. Yeah. And of course, if they're directly affected, there also should be some sort of compensation. So people see a value in having renewable assets around. Yes,
definitely. Yeah, and I think another point is enhancing the local conversation. I think often people feel that these changes that are happening in their surroundings maybe are not up to them. And, global or national companies are the ones making decisions, or, someone else above is making the decision, not them. So maybe with these incentives that you were mentioning, and then also having transparency, respect towards the local communities, engaging them, as you said, clear communication, all of that, it will feel like a joint decision. And I think that's probably a better way to get people on board. I mean, if I know something is imposing inspires resistance, right? In most cases. So, then it doesn't feel like an imposition. It just feels like a joint decision, and that everyone is getting benefited.
Yeah, and you also mentioned this communication part, which I also think is very important in every aspect, actually, of life. But being, more effective with the communication, with the efforts, is very crucial to getting people on board. This could just be about informing people how, this can actually reduce electricity rates. It doesn't have any impact on air quality. It lowers the global, CO2 emissions. It's compatible with agriculture and all these things. They're so important, and it's very important also for people to understand these reasons behind it.
Yeah.
Another great thing is that it creates a lot of jobs.
True.
We don't talk about that too often,
Yeah.
so that's also something people can communicate about.
Yeah.
The benefits of renewables.
Yeah, exactly. Cooperation between sectors too, which we
Yes.
just mentioned with the power farming. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we've mentioned some good things of how we can go from NIMBY to PIMBY.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Perfect way to finish our episode, actually. So yeah, I hope our listeners found this episode insightful. And thanks a lot, Kirstine, once again, for being here.
Thank you, Munia.
Thanks for listening to the Energy Explained in Short series. If this episode was interesting, follow us and stay tuned for more to come in the future.